What's the deal with Hal and Kate's dysfunctional relationship?
Will Stuart ever forgive Kate?
Is there anything that will make Kate reconsider VP?
And holy cow, what did Hal say to the president?
Red and Red Real Reviews gets into the inner workings of domestic and foreign government with The Diplomat, Season 2 on Netflix.
Ahoy, ladies! I didn't see you there. Would you guys like to set sail on this ocean of flavor?
Randall, look at eye contact, please. You're gonna be cool, right?
Oh, baby, I'm as cool as the other side of the pillow.
Been staring at this board for days.
When you play the Game of Thrones, you win or you die.
Act. Bears eat beets.
My brain is on fire. I'm dying.
I am the one who knocks.
Bears beets Battlestar Galactica.
When they say 2% milk, I don't know what the other 98% is.
It's hard to believe we're even the same species.
You know nothing, Jon Snow.
Oh my god. The microchip has been compromised.
Dracarys.
And welcome back to another episode of Red and Red Real Reviews. This is lucky number 7.
Siete! Fiesta!
Yeah, except instead of dealing with a foreign government that's Spanish speaking, we're dealing with the British government and the American government.
I was spotted tea.
Yeah. You know what? I almost was going to drink my detox tea for this podcast. I was thinking, how funny would that be if I held up my little teacup while we're talking about British people? Drink my dirty, mucky water, as Ted Lasso likes to say.
Yeah. I'm always in favor of props.
Yeah. So I didn't do it, but this is, we both watched the first season of The Diplomat kind of independently of each other. And we were kind of blown away, so to speak, from the ending of the first season. So yeah, getting into the second season, it's a fun show. I didn't really think I would be into something that was, all about the government and sort of, I wouldn't say like a spy show. Usually in movies like that, like I have a hard time following them and everything. And we were talking about how we had to take so many notes for Lincoln Lawyer, but I even more so took a novel's worth of notes for each episode of this show. I had to kind of reacquaint myself with the characters, even though I'd already watched the show. I had to kind of remember, what was that person's name? I remember them, but like, what was their name? And had to note it down and make sure I was keeping everybody straight and trying to keep the inner workings of the plot straight, just so that I knew who was working with who was working against who. So did you kind of find that same thing as like you had to, keep everything reined in because it was a little complicated subject matter?
It was like a web.
Yeah.
Like trying to make sure all the dots are connected. I didn't so much have a lot of problem remembering the characters, but I had trouble associating the names because there's a lot of scenes where they're referring to each other by their first names and then other scenes where they're referring to each other by their surnames. So like it took me it was like a year ago and we've watched a lot since then. So like they say Austin and then they say Denison, but they don't start saying Denison until later. So I didn't remember that Denison was the foreign secretary. So that took a while to put two and two together. And they were and with Trowbridge, sometimes it's the PM. A couple people refer to him as Nickel, and then other people refer to Trowbridge. So you've got three things that you're trying to like, okay, this, and this. Well, that's all the same person.
Yeah. They definitely go back and forth. So you're trying to keep things straight. I think at first I noted down, I just called her Park, and then they called her Idra after. So that was something. But then Stuart, they always say Stuart. They never say, I don't even know what his last name is. They hardly say his last name, if at all. So yeah, it's definitely like a first name basis with some characters, last name basis. So I just kind of stuck to a mostly last name basis in my notes.
Yeah.
Just to keep things straight. And I did see an article mention a likeness to House of Cards, and I sort of had to agree on that one, where obviously you don't agree with everything that Kate and Hal do, but you are kind of rooting for them. I do think generally, yes, they have their flaws, but they are better people than
Underwood.
Claire and the Underwoods. Yeah. Frank and Claire Underwood. Of course, they're better people than them. So it is easier to like them, and like they have their funny banter. So it's a lot easier to like them. But it does seem like, you know, House of Cards is more about the influence of things going on in Congress and about, I don't even understand all of that, you know, with the and, you know, influencing votes in a certain favor and the inner workings of that. I actually think I prefer like the foreign dealings of this show to the stuff in House of Cards.
Yeah, it's a lot. I guess you could point that to a lot less seedy relationships to navigate,
Yeah.
as opposed to like having a tiered system of government to work around and then work around each individual system, as opposed to this is just foreign entity, and then whatever the crossover is to blob over here.
Yeah, and this, despite, you know, there being obviously conspiracies and things going on behind the scenes, it doesn't seem as you put it in your notes, like the backstabbing and
Yeah.
just the cutthroatness is a lot less than what the Underwoods dealt with.
I think that's why I didn't necessarily equate it to House of Cards, because it's a much lesser extreme. That they're not like Frank is going like it's almost like Frank is doing the same thing Hal does, but he's going through with a chainsaw. He's going through with a machete. He's just on a warpath.
Right.
And
He's
Hal is,
offing people left and right.
yeah, literally in some cases.
Yeah.
And Hal, like brain wise, like he's still there. He's still thinking of that kind of strategy, but he's doing a lot more tact, a lot more subtlety.
Yeah, and especially because he's been an ambassador, he has that in his past. He's kind of able to be somewhat of an advisor to Kate, and it's a little bit more respectful, even though there are moments where they're wondering, did we make the wrong choice? Did we make the right choice? It's still better choices than anything Frank Underwood would have made.
And to that point, I didn't think of that. And to that point, like because Hal has this experience and Kate's kind of, even though she's the primary ambassador in this relationship, overall she's still kind of his junior as far as experience is concerned.
Oh, yeah.
So she does kind of rely on his opinions, whereas Frank and Claire are two like alpha personalities. They don't want to rely on each other. Like Claire's gonna do her thing and Frank's gonna do his thing, and sometimes once in a while they overlap.
And I feel like it was mentioned in the first season that there is somewhat of an age difference, isn't there? Doesn't Kate make a reference to being like a good deal? There might be like 6 to 8 years between them, as far as age, perhaps.
I mean, anything within 10 is pretty negligible, but just, I mean, maybe this is just maybe Carrie Russell's just aging gracefully, but there is kind of a visual difference between the two of them as well.
Yeah, for sure. Rufus Sewell, he appears a decent amount older than her, and I think it is, yeah. Carrie Russell has aged very gracefully, and I would just like to say, I love how even in the first season of this show, she represents for all the people, all the women with widow's peaks in the world, which I have a bit of a widow's peak, but she rocks hers. Hers is a lot more pronounced than mine is, and I'm always looking at it like she's speaking for all of us.
Hashtag hair follicle problems.
Yeah. So getting into kind of the main plot that drove this season. So once this whole situation came about, you know, the aftermath of the explosion and them trying to figure out, you know, what had happened with the car bombing, what happened with the warship, what were sort of your first impressions of Trowbridge and Royland? And then as Kate and Dennison started working together, with Idra included, where did you think the story was going to go, and who did you think was to blame for setting this whole thing in play?
Well, I wasn't expecting who it actually wound up being.
Right?
Um, I kind of figured that they were gonna stick with Royland and Trowbridge, even though, as the way the story progressed, that maybe they would have just set it up as a matter of incompetence versus actual malice.
Mm,
Um, but I thought, of course, I'm always a cynic watching like how Hollywood is going to portray a government official, especially one in a populist mold. There's a certain populist politician in the mainstream that everyone hates. Wink, wink. So
mm.
I couldn't put that on my mind that they're trying to set up Trowbridge in that individual's form, especially with when they start tying the Russia stuff. With Russia is always Hollywood's boogeyman, even
Yes.
without what goes on in the real world. So I wasn't but I also wasn't expecting them to come back around with the redemption arc. They kind of like Royland uh, was the story's early villain, but they
Hmm.
kind of left her as a villain throughout, just more due to incompetence. And Trowbridge kind of came back around to they wanted the audience to kind of feel for him a little bit. Like this guy was just a product of having bad people supporting him, or not necessarily bad people, but ignorant or ill advised or misguided people around him.
Yeah, I definitely at the beginning when Kate it was kind of questioning, did Trowbridge have something to do with this? It just doesn't seem right. I definitely thought Trowbridge was guilty with what they were making him out to be. I was like, oh man, he definitely knows. He knows, and he was the one who set it in motion probably. And I was kind of rooting for, when Dennison planned to take him aside at the party and they planned to oust him. I was rooting for Dennison to take over and get him out. And, it was a kind of a group effort. And then when it started falling apart, I was like, oh no. So when they planned that whole thing, I was on the edge of my seat, like, okay, did he know? And is he going to show it when they kind of entrap him like that? Is he going to show whether he actually knew or not? So, yeah. So at the beginning, you're kind of taught to latch on to the belief that Trowbridge is guilty. And then on the other hand, you're kind of taught to feel sympathy for Royland purely just by looking at her. She's this like skinny, tiny little old lady. So like, I think they did that specifically so that you're kind of thinking, oh, she can't have done anything wrong. She's just a little old lady, or just thinking that she couldn't be guilty of any sort of wrongdoing. So they're kind of painting that picture for you.
And they also kind of gave competing imageries of her, because on one hand, like when she's off camera, they are trying to instill this caricature of a right-wing extremist in Royland. But then when you see her, she's almost like, I'm a scapegoat here. Like she's like, I don't want to say she's playing the victim card, but she's like, like I didn't know. I thought, I didn't know what was going on. I was just trying to do right by my country. So they're always kind of giving you like competing themes to her character build up. Like maybe like she's not necessarily this, even though they want you to think, or at least want the kind of establishment politicians in the mix that think that she's this bad person, but they give the persona to the audience that she's kind of more of a victim in this.
Yes, definitely. There was a lot of that victim mentality. And then, you're feeling like Idra is in the wrong for, she keeps saying like, I don't want to be holding this woman captive, but we got to do what we got to do. And, so yeah, you are seeing Royland as sort of the victim. And especially when Trowbridge reacts the way that he ends up reacting, obviously they were worried for her safety. And like, I don't know if it's that they're worried for her safety, but it's like they have to preserve that truth and that
Mhm.
doubt that everyone has, that she knows what really happened. And so they're just trying to prevent him from killing her.
Yeah. And almost, and they start to split towards the end. He's still like, you still kind of get the impression that he is the populist candidate, but he's trying to distance himself from Raylan at the end, even if it's like, well, like, even she, like I said, she's either malicious or incompetent, one or the other. So it's like, in either event, this is not someone I wanted to be a party to.
Right. And it just, that whole thing, despite Trowbridge, acting violently, you do feel some sympathy for him. The fact that he was just so shook by that's how he reacted. And it does kind of swap, where you think more negatively about her, you're left with a more negative feeling about Royland, and you do have some sympathy for Trowbridge. And then you really see him be supported by Dennison, and then those two want absolutely nothing to do with Kate.
That was a weird moment at the end too, because
Right?
Trowbridge and Dennison were very antithesis to each other,
Yes.
and then they kind of came together when this starts to be revealed that, like, okay, maybe there's something more with Royland. There's something else going on that we don't know yet. And then at the end, obviously, when I guess it's Trowbridge's wife, when she's trying to tell him he needs to get out of this, and Dennison, and Trowbridge is forcing Dennison, is like, what do you think? What do you think? And finally says, yeah, you need to get out. And then he kind of like, all right, and he walks away. And it was like, so that one was like, that not only leaves a kind of a cliffhanger, but at the same time, so I was like, okay, well, I guess Dennison really is not his buddy after all.
Yeah. I mean, you're not sure how it's going to continue. Like, are they going to play the long game, like they mentioned, of maybe bringing it to light later? But for the meantime, Dennison's really given Kate the cold shoulder, and I think he
Yeah,
knows it's better not to have a personal relationship with her, but he also is like, dude, I don't want anything to do with her professionally either.
yeah, yeah. He may even be sensing he may even be sensing a too much of a seedy ambition there. Whether he faults her for it or faults Hal for it or whatever the case may
Yeah.
be. He may even be recognizing some kind of seedy nature about the Wylers that he doesn't want anything to do with.
Yeah. And
Dennis,
speaking of Seedy Wyler relationship, with Kate and Hal, they're making you laugh sometimes with their banter, and then sometimes they're making you feel really disturbed, where you're like a fly on the wall and you're like, this is awkward and I shouldn't be watching. So I mean, they have a pretty dysfunctional marriage. So we knew obviously in the first season it had been already hanging on a string. They were going to split up before they found out that Kate was being considered for VP. And then at the end of the first season, she almost sleeps with Dennison. I mean, I don't really remember if there's a moment where it's close or anything. I don't remember how close it gets before they find out about the car bombing, but I mean, were there any scenes or things that happened this season that made you just kind of think, like, what is wrong with their marriage? Like, holy hell, what is going on?
well, you said it before, and as far as like if we're comping them to the Underwoods, Kate and Hal are still eons more likable than Frank and
Oh,
Claire
yeah. Oh, yeah.
Underwood. This is a situation where Frank and Claire Underwood were probably close at one point, and then they drifted apart because of their each kind of alpha mode to ambition. For Hal and Kate, I feel like they're together solely for a rise to power. Like, that's how they came together. But there are certain aspects of their personality that come through that show that they do have chemistry. It's just
Yes.
kind of a work chemistry. It's not a natural chemistry. So it's kind of nice to see two people that probably necessarily didn't come together for any uh, organic way, but they're kind of growing with each other um and their relationships. I don't want to say blossoming. That's kind of a weird word in this context, but it's kind of evolving along as you see it.
Yeah, and I was thinking, obviously it's not super relatable because most of us in the world are not politicians, right? But there are
Thank God.
definitely there are definitely politicians that come to mind, and we're not going to say any names, but you know for sure, like damn well as a citizen of your country, that there are relationships between politicians and their spouses out there that are
Yeah.
purely relationships that are of power or advantage. They're not together because they love each other, like let's be honest. So
Yeah.
that's what's interesting about their relationship, is that yes, you know, they were going to split before she was being floated for VP. So this is the thing that's keeping them together, because they have to keep up appearances. You can't get elected to a position of power if you're going to be divorced and single. Like who do we know that has been elected to president or vice president that has been single or divorced?
I don't want to misquote history, but I think there was one, but it was many years ago, who was single. But I don't remember. I don't 100% know if my memory is correct, so I don't want to quote it.
Right. It's all about image for the most part. So even if you're together behind the scenes, there's zero chemistry, you don't even like each other, you don't care about each other, you don't support each other, that doesn't matter, because you're trying to keep up the image of you being this supportive, loving couple. And so they're kind of having to struggle with that. They're having to be very close in front of the cameras and in front of the leaders that come in and out of meetings with them. So yeah, I mean, there are some moments where they're definitely struggling with, especially because, I mean, I wouldn't say both of them are very alpha, but they definitely have their disagreements about how to do things. So that's what they're arguing about a lot of the time. Hal says, "Oh, I would make this move," and Kate's like, I don't know about that." She's kind of the one that has a lot more of a guilty conscience, right? She's
Mhm.
like, yes,
She's
Hal doesn't like the fact that Stuart is pissed at him, and Kate doesn't like the fact that Stuart is like mad at her about Ronnie, but they kind of deal with it in different ways, don't they? Kate like just carries it around with her, and Hal's kind of like, oh, like he's just kind of pissed at me.
she's more of a has more empathy in
Empathetic.
that. Yeah. Whereas Tal's like, whatever, all right. We move
Yeah,
on. It's another day.
right. And that's the first moment where there was a definite uh push and shove with them, was when Stuart basically told her he was upset, and he said, "Listen, I told you who Royland was. You're the one who made the error. Like, you knew what you were getting into. That's on you." And he made her feel bad about it. So then Kate is kind of venting to Hal about what happened, and Hal just kind of shrugs and says, "Well, it's the cost of doing business." And she gets really upset, and she's like, "Don't you ever say that to me again. Like, that's messed up." And then they have this whole fight where Hal tells her to sleep in the other room, but then, because of his surgery and how he was injured, he can't reach his shoes, like to take his shoes off and go to bed or something. So he's like literally just kind of in limbo, trying to reach his toes. And he's like, I can't reach my shoes. And then so she kind of comes over and helps him. And then it's just such a roller coaster of emotions between them.
There was another tender-hearted moment that I saw at the party because Stewart was very convinced that he was going to have some post-traumatic situations from when the
Yes.
fireworks started going off. So he leaves, and Kate's like, "Oh my God, I didn't even think of that. Of course, yeah, you do what you got to do." And then she says to Hal, "Like, are you going to be okay?" It's like, "Oh no, I'll be fine." So of course, the fireworks start going off, and you see Hal like starting to
Mm.
get flustered and freaked out about it, and she kind of like holds him tight, and they have kind of this, I don't want to say kumbaya moment, but like this, tender, loving, nurturing husband wife thing. Like, it's like, it's okay, I'll support you because you're obviously kind of losing your shit right now with fireworks. So that was also kind of a tender moment as well.
Yeah, I mean that was an example of them, you know, being an actual couple with actual chemistry, wanting to support each other. Like you knew that she was the only one who could diffuse that anxiety for him. And that was a really sweet moment. So yeah, it's like you're just on this roller coaster with them in their marriage, and then when
I did kind of enjoy the 4th of July banter too, when they're picking out the stuff for the party and how much everything costs. And she's like, I don't want to be tied to this big mega donor going for VP. And it's like, don't worry about it. Nobody's going to care about this. You know, like you want to make the donor happy, so he gives you the money. Just let's just get the fancy napkins and get the lobster rolls and all this other stuff.
Right. He's definitely of the mind of like, we got to do what we got to do. And like, you got to keep this donor happy and blah, blah, blah. And she's like, I just feel like that's going to come across really bad. The taxpayers are going to be pissed if they see that we have lobster. You know, she's more concerned about the optics of things. He's just like, whatever, we'll do what we have to do to get to where we want to be. And yeah, so that's a complicated thing. There's always a power struggle with them. And then one moment that was kind of crazy is just like, I can't imagine just this happening in real life. Like this would just be crazy. But when Hal corners Dennison and he invites him to Scotland, and he's literally like, you're going to say yes and you're going to come even though you don't want to, because I know that the day that I got blown up in that car bombing, you were going to sleep with my wife. So, and then the next thing that Dennison says, he's like, okay, I'll be there. You know,
yeah, like, it's like, all right, I'm not gonna fight this one.
Like that's a pretty alpha move to say that to the guy that you think your wife almost had a relationship with, just to address it, just put it out there like that. Like that was savage.
Yeah, no, and the fact that like he did it from not from a vengeful standpoint. Like it was I know we're going to the chess moves next, but like that to me was in the game of politics, that was a chess move. I know you want to get in my wife's pants, so you're gonna do me a favor right now.
Yeah, and speaking of Hal wanting to get into his wife's pants, Dennis. Yeah, once Kate says she wants to be VP, Hal is like all over her because that's what he wants for her, right? Like
I got a good laugh out of that one.
Yeah, that was funny because it's just, again, it's like they're just all over the place. Like she finally says like what he's been wanting, you know, out of this, and it like makes him so happy that he's just like, oh, I've never seen you be hotter, like saying something like, I want to be VP.
And she goes, I know,
right? So yeah, speaking of the chess moves that are going on within this show, so sometimes the characters are kind of talking things out and they're offering each other nuggets of wisdom. So to me, there was a couple profound quotes I picked out, but after that, I mean, despite this being mostly a drama, there are those kind of funny moments. So we'll talk about those a little too. The serious moments that I took from this is when Kate is talking to Idra about how she suspects that Trowbridge is involved with ordering a strike on his own warship. She says, I think the call is coming from inside the house, which she's kind of struck by the fact that she's saying this, that she thinks something, you know, a leader is wanting to harm their own government or their own people. Mm-hmm. So I think it was funny that she worded it that way. Like she couldn't say like, I think Trowbridge is the one who ordered the strike. So she kind of has to say it coded, right?
Yeah.
It's like, you never know who's listening. And then to the same effect, when Dennison is telling Kate about his plan to oust Trowbridge, she's kind of like, oh, are you going to be PM? You know, and he's like, playing it off, and he's like, let's not praise the day before the evening. Basically, like, let's not get ahead of ourselves before we have to do this whole thing and before we put this into motion. So I thought that was an interesting quote, like very diplomatic of him. And I mean, obviously you can tell he's a good guy, but he doesn't want to, like, he wants to be PM, but he's not going to be like excited and gunning for it. He doesn't really want to admit that, like, he wants it, you know?
That's someone who is very aware of how quickly uh, advantageous government relationships can twist on a dime. Like
Yes.
what one day you're someone's best friend and you could have a high cabinet position, and the next day you're sworn enemies and they don't want anything to do with you, and your career is gonna plateau right there.
Right. He's very aware of how the system works, and you can tell that he doesn't really want to play into it, but he kind of feels like he has to be the thing that breaks this injustice wide open. So I thought that was an interesting quote. And then
I had a weird interpretation of Dennison throughout, because to me he comes off like a establishment type of politician, which I detest, but at the same time he also puts forth an imagery of he's a good guy.
Yeah.
So it was like I kind of had like a weird emotional balance with this character.
I don't know that I saw him as like a established politician. Like, obviously he knows what he's doing. He's very dignified, but I mostly saw him as like a good guy who's like, let's do things by the book and let's do it right, you know, which isn't a bad thing necessarily. And then as far as funny quotes, I mean, there were a million funny quotes about Idra and Stuart's relationship, you know, with Kate talking about she's like, how does the geometry work? You know, like, because he's so tall and Idra is so short. And then I think Kate says something to Stuart about, like, after Idra had already broken up with him, she like had just found out about their relationship, and she's like, I just think it's so fucking adorable. Like,
yeah, and of course she's saying that after they had already broken up, so it's like awkward.
Yeah, he's like, stop talking.
Yeah.
What you had a couple you had one funny quote which
I wrote down.
Yeah, this was pretty funny.
So that when they were discussing their faux coup d'etat of sorts in the garden, and it's like, okay, well, you know, this is like a party. This is the 4th of July thing. We can't have this associated with your coup. So when they're talking about like where should we go, and I guess this party had a reputation for people getting a little sentimental, so to speak, out in the garden. So it's like, well, just tell them to look around. If someone's fucking under the table with the baby tomato plants, go somewhere else.
And I think somebody, I forget who made who had the line, but it was like something about what you were giving alcohol to 3,000 people and you expect nothing crazy to happen. Like, what?
Yeah. No. Yeah, really. Inducing a situation, then surprised by the results.
Yeah, exactly. And so, I mean, we've kind of talked a bit about what our impressions were of these characters, you know, throughout. But, you know, now that we've seen the entire season 2, did you have a favorite character? Did it change from who it was in the beginning of the season, or did it stay the same consistently for you?
I'm gonna sound, I guess, a little basic here because he's one of the main characters, but I really like Hal. I mean, he has this power-hungry nature, but it's in a lighter side. He's there's a human side to his kind of thirst for rise to prominence. In he's not really into it in a sense where he's got to like sink his teeth into someone and bring them down. It's just like, this is the way things are done in this town. You know, well, town obviously that's normally referring to Washington D.C.
Right.
But just in this game, in this game of politics. Like this is just the way you have to do things. So it doesn't really feel like his quest for power or his thirst for this isn't a malicious thing. It's just, hey, I want to get here, and this is what I got to do to get to the top.
Yeah, and I would say the same of him. I don't look at him negatively because of that. But so was he your favorite? Like, were you obviously we were all pulling for him to be okay after the explosion. Like once you found out he was okay, like was he pretty much like consistently your favorite, or did he like take the lead at a certain point because of a certain thing?
I think maybe he's just my favorite by default because there's
Okay.
really not a lot of prominent characters. There's really not a lot of prominent characters in the story. Like it's a very small group,
Yeah.
and like none of the other characters really having a like none of them really strike a nerve with me for better or for worse. You know what I mean?
Okay.
I don't really hate any of them. I don't really like have an adornment for any of them. They're just
Hmm.
like I kind of have just varying degrees of like dislike. You know, like I said with Dennison, like I generally like Dennison's character. I have this envision of him where he's for con continuing the way government is, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing.
Yeah, I kind of feel the same way. Like there's literally nobody that I hate, even Grace, played by Allison Janney. I don't hate her, I would say. She's a somewhat abrasive character, but I don't hate her.
I could grow to hate her depending on how
Right.
this plays out. I just feel like she was like actually visible in such a small part of the end of the season that I didn't really get a chance to grow any visceral emotion towards her.
Right.
But I also feel like if things kind of play out the way it looked like they were, and now, after the cliffhanger, of course, I could see myself growing to hate her.
I could too, and we'll talk about that in a minute where we think things are going.
Which is weird to me to think like I could hate a character played by Allison Janney because the only role I can think of her in is Mom, where she's
Oh, the
Anna
show.
Faris's yeah, where she's Anna Faris's slutty mother.
Yeah, I mean she plays a mom character in like a few like teen comedies, and
Mhm.
there's a movie called The Duff, which she's the mother in, and she's hilarious. So yeah, I would recommend that one for people who haven't seen it. But yeah, I mean, you're right that it's just varying degrees of like. I generally like Kate. I don't feel
Mhm.
like, oh, she's so dumb or she makes the
Yeah,
worst decisions. Like I generally like everybody. I admit I first, when things were going and things were getting going at first, and Idra was like, didn't want Kate to be heavily involved with the Royland thing because she wanted her to have plausible deniability. I was like, oh, I admire the balls of her to get things done and stuff. But I kind of feel like as the season went on, I started to like her less. And I'm not saying that I hate her or anything. It's just I like her less. And I think that's the reason that at first when the whole thing with the car bombing happened, and Ronnie being killed, and I sort of felt like Stewart's uh anger towards Kate was like misplaced, and like I was like, oh,
yeah.
why is he being so tough about that? And I kind of thought that it was annoying, but the more time went on, I felt like he's actually one of the most like true-hearted characters on the show. Like he does want the best for people. He sees the good in people. Like yes, it can come across, when he wants Kate to dress a certain way or appear a certain way. He's just trying to help her. He's not doing it maliciously. And he's really funny. I find myself like rooting for him, and obviously you got to feel some sympathy for him, like as he keeps saying to Idra, like, I think it was a mistake that we broke up. And she kind of keeps bringing up, well, she doesn't want to talk about it most of the time, but then she's the one to bring up, like, listen, if your boss ends up moving to America, to be VP, like that means you move too. Basically, like I can't be with you if there's some distance. So that's why she kind of cut it off abruptly. But you still feel bad for him because you can tell that he really loves her and he really wants to be with her, and she just is like, that's it, we can't be together if that's going to be what happens.
Yeah, and like to me, I think maybe it is because it's such a cold break for her. Like I don't, and I mean maybe my memory's fuzzy from season one. Maybe I felt a different way, but in this season, like I don't get the sympathy for their relationship that could have been because she does have such a cold break from it. And I'm it's like, bro, get it together. She doesn't want to be with you. Move on.
Yeah. Yeah, you do feel for him, but yeah, it's like she's just, that she's just not having it. So like it's not even worth talking to her about. When someone is so closed off and just like cold about it, you should take that as a hint.
Yeah, like the chemistry is just non-existent.
Yeah.
The other thing I felt sympathetic for Stuart is that he had one moment in where he said something like, "Oh yeah, and they say London's not a serious post." So you also have sympathy for him career-wise. Like he was kind of put in his position in the embassy in Britain as kind of like a slight, or at least maybe he sees it as a slight. Maybe there were other embassy positions he was gunning for and he didn't get for whatever reason. So there is there's kind of like a career trajectory sympathy I have for him as well.
Yeah, and I think that kind of that's a good segue for us talking about the ending and how what that says about what's going to happen in season 3. And I knew this. I saw Rufus Sewell on the Today Show last week where obviously they gave a spoiler that he was alive in season 2 because we didn't know after that explosion if he was going to be alive or not. So I knew that he was going to be alive. And he also said something about how future seasons would take place in the United States. And you know what? I knew that beforehand, and even I didn't really see coming what happened, which is crazy. Like you would have think that would have spoiled it for me, and I would have been like, "Oh, I know exactly what's going to happen," but no.
Yeah, I would have. I figured. I figured Hal was going to be okay after the explosion, just because he's such a prominent character. I can't imagine you killing off a prominent character after one season. I mean, I guess Game of Thrones did it with Ned, but whatever. Yeah. But like to me, what I'm most curious with Hal is I want to know what he said to the president. Like he's calling Kate and he's freaked out because I was gonna call Gannon and I thought he was gonna make it about himself, so I thought it'd be better to call the president himself, and he got really upset and now he's dead. And I'm like, what the frick?
Yeah.
So like, what did you say to him? Especially because they've set up the season like the president was gonna kick Grace Penn out of the administration anyway. So what could Hal have said based on kind of what he and Kate were hinting at beforehand? What could he have said that upset him so much about Grace Penn? He was thrown into some cardiac event or whatever that he was so upset about someone he was going to dump anyway.
Yeah, I don't know. It makes you kind of wonder what happened, and obviously Hal didn't. That's where it shows that he's not doing anything malicious because he's so shaken by the fact that he said something that, I mean, anyone would be upset if you inadvertently killed someone. Like they imply like heart attack, right? I mean, I don't know what else could have happened, but yeah, I mean, man. So now that, we ended with, and I, of course, didn't see it coming. As all the Secret Service agents are rushing outside towards Grace, I'm just like, holy shit. Like,
yeah.
And now we know that Grace is president. So, man, I mean, where do you think things will go next season? Like, which characters do you think will go to the United States, or, which characters will we see? Which ones won't we see?
I don't think we'll see Park again. unless it's extremely in minimal sense. On Stewart, I'm sure, especially because it's funny, we were talking about how mad he is at Kate throughout the season, and then as soon as she's got the ambition to be VP, all of a sudden he's her best friend again. Like, oh yeah, please take me with you, you know?
Yeah, and I
So
think to your point that he's really hungry for a change in his career, right? He
mhm.
really wants to experience a change in that his career going up and him being in a post where he can challenge himself, and like this is his element, you know, like
Yeah.
he would be in his total element if she were VP.
And honestly, it'd probably be the best thing for him if Park was kind of, I don't want to say written off, but kind of written off. So then he can kind of blossom. We can kind of see the Stewart character grow as Stewart.
Yeah, and you know what? My guess is that they're not going to completely get rid of Idra. I think what they're going to do is it'll kind of be like how we saw Billy on like various phone calls with Stuart and Hal. Just like kind of like every once in a while she'll be there like from afar. I think that's what they'll do with her. Um
Almost like a support role, like Stewart's having a crisis in his head, so he calls Park, or Kate's having a crisis in her head, so she calls Park, you know.
right. So I mean my last question is obviously, you know, it's kind of difficult because Grace and Kate kind of come to an understanding, right? Towards the end, where they kind of get each other and like you can kind of see them like understanding each other, kind of being friends. And then it kind of ends with them, you know, with contention again. So do you think now that there's, you know, because of what Hal did, do you think that if Kate is still wanting to be VP, that Grace is going to really make shit miserable for her as president?
I mean, I would like that from an audience perspective, just to see some strife between two major characters.
Mm.
Like I would want to see them have some contentious relationship instead of just being some super, double rise to the presidency. I would want to see some strife between the characters. So like I hope that they have some adversarial relationship. And
Yeah.
to me, that only, because we know Grace Penn has done some bad things. So to me, that only increases the probability that Hal can keep working his inner ways.
And so do you think that the I don't want to say like the UK storyline is going to be scrapped, but do you think we're going to see Trowbridge and Dennison again, or do you think it's just going to be like a shift to like the United States and just a different plot line?
I wouldn't be upset because I think it was kind of a flimsy story. I think the whole bombing of the ship was kind of a flimsy storyline anyway.
Mm.
Um, eh, but so I wouldn't be upset if they just kind of left it be and let the audience assume like, all right, Parliament works or that works their investigation out however they do, and that's the end of it. But I also wouldn't mind it being kind of a little distraction storyline, because I think there is something that could be told from, especially now that kind of Dennison's moving more into an adversary camp to Trowbridge. I think that could be like a fun little distraction storyline between the two of them, as far as how
Yeah.
they move past that, and like is he gonna resign? Is he gonna be, I don't want to say stubborn, but is he gonna be resistant and keep his post? So I would kind of I wouldn't mind that being continued as a subplot.
Yeah, and I think also just with that actor who plays Dennison, I recognized him kind of after the fact from Carnival Row, which was a 2-season show on Amazon that didn't last
I
very
know.
long, but he
Okay.
was he was good in that. My prediction is that the actor who plays Dennison is he's going to be like, I think in the future, the new like Idris Elba.
No.
I think I like he just, you know, he has the look, he has like the like the deep like British accent. I think he's going to be like the new it guy.
Yeah, and he's not quite the brick house that Idris Elba is, but he's certainly got everything else.
Yeah, I think he's going to be like he's a great looking black man. He's got the British accent. Like I think he's going to be like the new sexiest man alive kind of thing. So I'm kind of interested to see like where his career is going to go, especially after being, featured more with this being the second season of the show. Like I think people will take notice of him more.
Yeah. I wouldn't mind that. It'd be nice to see career offshoots.
Yeah. And speaking of taking notice, if you enjoy listening to this show, we would appreciate it if you gave us 5 stars and left us some reviews if you haven't already. Also, make sure you follow along with us on Instagram and TikTok. He is Nutmeg, the number 2, Palmetto, like the disgusting bug. I am Binge the Ginge with dots between the words for Instagram, all run together for TikTok. Give us both follows on social and stay tuned to the show on all of our platforms. We have YouTube and Rumble for our delicious ginger faces. And then we have Spotify, iHeartRadio, Google Podcasts, and Apple Podcasts for audio. So we have some exciting things coming up. If you could please join us next Sunday, November 10th at 9 p.m. Eastern for a live discussion of the Yellowstone premiere. Yellowstone is back. We've been waiting for this moment for a long time. So we'll be going live for each of the 6 episodes. There's 6 episodes of this last season. So we'll be going live for every single one. And then if you make sure to watch the second part of season 4 of Outer Banks coming up, which we'll be covering for episode 8 of the podcast. Until the next real review, Red and Red signing out.
In less than an hour, aircraft from here will join others from around the world.
Don't act so surprised, Your Highness.
Hey guys, you ready to let the dogs out?
What? Do what?
No. Try not. Do. Or do not.
Because I don't want no scrubs.
Let the dogs out, like, who let the dogs out? Who?
Who brought this guy along?
I can go slow ahead. Come on down and chump some of this shit.
One more thing. Do me a favor. Don't go chasing waterfalls.
Mankind, that word should have new meaning for all of us today.
You're gonna need a bigger boat. Snakes. Why did it have to be snakes?
I'll take care, all right? None but love for you. None but love for you.
Have any clue what's about to happen to him?
Oh, not a chance in hell. Good night.
Blow up! Peace!
Fire, you son of a... You did it. You crazy son of a bitch, you did it.
Toodaloo, motherfucker.
Hey, It's not funny anymore. TLC references.
Still, nothing. I swear to you.
But as the day when the world declared in one voice, we will not go quietly into the night. We will not vanish without a fight. We're going to live on. We're going to survive. Today, we celebrate our Independence Day.